Good evening. It's good to see all of you here tonight. We do have a really good number of visitors here, and we appreciate you being here tonight. I know most of you are probably visiting here with family, but as always, if you don't have a regular place of worship, we would love to have you back here at O'Neill, but we love having you here tonight. We appreciate you being here. If you want to open your Bibles up to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10 is where our thought will come from for our lesson tonight, so I encourage you to open your Bibles there. Eddie handed me the little lapel just a moment ago. We got two different lapels. I've always said one of these days I'm going to get tangled up in all these wires up here. But anyway, they both have new batteries, and Eddie said the one is good for like 9.5 hours. And I think that'll get us through tonight. I'm not sure if it'll get us through Wednesday night or not, but if Jeff starts doing this, we're going to cut it off. But it is good to see all of you here tonight. I'll tell you one funny, and then we'll get started. We was up here singing with the kids tonight, and we was doing the gospel chariot. I got to the part about the devil, and I don't know, I just like to mix it up. And I said, all right, I said, here comes the devil. I said, what do we do to him? About that time, Tommy walked through the back, and he said, I thought you was talking about me. I said, no, I wasn't talking about an elder walking in, here comes the devil. So my apologies to Tommy, just bad timing. But anyway, no, I appreciate all of you, as always, having your children here, and I appreciate you taking part in that as well. I know it encourages them to hear you sing out. I want to read you an article tonight that I found a good while back. I've used it on a different number of occasions, but it's entitled "Helping a Little Bird," and it's about one of those little-known acts, kind of behind the scenes acts of Abraham Lincoln. Very impressive, though, when you think about it. And we'll base our thoughts on that tonight. It said, during the heaviest stress of the Civil War, when many matters of great moment were occupying his thoughts, Abraham Lincoln was walking one day through the woods. He came across a fully feathered baby bird which had fallen from its nest and whose life was consequently in danger. He took time out of his busy mind and his deep thoughts to pick up the little bird, examine the branches over the overhanging tree, and until that nest was discovered, he kept looking. When he finally found it, he gently placed the bird safely back in its nest. He saved that bird from danger, ultimately saving its life, and didn't think any more about it. Went on his way and went about his day. The amazing thing about that is that somebody witnessed that. He didn't come back and tell anybody what he did. Somebody witnessed that. And that particular person had witnessed a lot of different things that he had done, many of which he's still well known for today. But he said that's probably one of the greatest acts that he ever saw Lincoln do. What's so important about that? I mean, it's just a bird, right? Why did he consider that to be one of the greatest acts that he ever saw that very influential character do? Well, that's kind of the thought process of our lesson tonight, because so many times we live in a world that glorifies the big things. And we live in a world that it's either go big or go home. And a lot of times those little things we just kind of brush to the side. We just kind of overlook it. We think, well, that's just really not that important. It's not that essential. And we just go on, and a lot of times we do nothing. But I want you to understand something, and I think this is something that should stick with us. It says a small man may on occasion rise to do a big thing. I mean, we can all have our days, right? Sometimes we all get lucky. Sometimes we all have a good, strong day, and we may really pull through, and we may do a big thing. But it takes an even bigger man to do a small one, a small, simple act with equal gladness. And I think a lot of times that's what we miss in life as God's people. We can get so hung up on what the elders do, or what the preacher does, or what certain people do, because everybody sees that. And I understand that. There's a lot of things like that are seen. But what I always try to get people to understand, and myself as well, because some of our greatest works are those that are not seen. And what I always try to get people to understand, and what I try to remind myself of, is that we need to be equally glad, perhaps even more glad, even happier, to do those small things that so many times get overlooked. I had somebody tell me one time, and you've probably heard this before, it takes pennies to make a dollar, right? Those little things go a long way, and they do for God as well. I want us to consider that tonight as we open our Bibles there to Matthew chapter 10 and verse 42, and we consider the title of tonight's lesson, Just a Cup of Cold Water. Matthew 10 and in verse 42, Jesus says there, "Whoever gives one of these little ones only a cup of cold water in my name, or in the name of a disciple, surely I say to you, he shall by no means lose his reward." Isn't that amazing? Jesus says, if you'll just give just a cup of cold water, you're not going to lose your reward even in that. Is he trying to say that it depends on the level of what you do, depending on whether you get rewarded or not? No, that's not the point. But what he is trying to get people to understand, what he's trying to get his disciples to understand, and what we need to understand, is that we don't need to underestimate that cup of cold water. It goes a long way. And if you're hot and you're tired and it's a tough day outside, it definitely means a whole lot more then, but it always means a lot. Just a cup of cold water will go a long way, and that reward is so important. Now, why didn't he use something else? Why did he use a cup of cold water? There may be a lot of analysis we can throw out at that. I just want to keep it very simple, and that is this. Why did Jesus make such a big deal out of such a small thing? Well, that's the question that I want us to answer tonight. Because I think it's important for us to understand that, and I think it's important for us to understand that so that we will continue to serve God in whatever way we can. Just like Catherine was talking about this morning. I want to be a better servant, and I commend her for that. And we all should have that same desire. I want to be a better servant. But being a better servant has to come with a mentality that we serve in whatever capacity we can. And most of the work that we do probably may be the small work. But it all adds up to please God and to glorify His name. If Jesus could do all these wondrous works and if He was so powerful, why did He make such a big deal out of such a small thing? I think for primarily two reasons. And I want to look at those in the beginning, and then we're going to look at just three very simple points tonight of what our mentality should be moving forward, striving to, as we close out a year and Lord willing, hopefully open a new year, how we can be better servants moving forward. The first thing that I think really jumps out is that small things will grow into large things when God is involved. Now, a lot of times we look at our inabilities rather than our abilities. A lot of times we'll focus on those inabilities. We'll think about all the things that we can't do. And then we think, well, because of I can't do this, I can't do that, so on and so on, then I really don't have that much of an impact. Well, it's really not about you. It's not about me. It's about our efforts and about having our hearts in the right place and having the zeal that we need to have. And God gives the increase as He sees fit. And we need to understand that. But I want you to notice what it says there in Matthew 13 and verse 31. He says, another parable He put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds. I mean, it barely has any weight or density to it whatsoever. I mean, the wind will just blow it away. So small, so small. But yet when it is planted and when it takes root and when it grows into the greater of the herbs, becomes a tree. The birds of the air come and nest in its branches. From the smallest thing, the smallest seed that somebody may look at and think, it's just a mustard seed. Look what it grew into. And we need to understand that if we'll just give our best effort to whatever we can do, and that's kind of how we're going to bring our lesson to a close tonight, God expects us to just do what we can. If we would just give our best effort at doing what we can, who knows the tree that may come from that? And the branches that it may bless people with in their lives. And so many other benefits. So I believe that's at least one reason why Jesus made such a big deal about something so small. Is because He understood that if God is in it, big things happen. We need to understand that as well. Another thing is the manner in which we give, or the manner in which we serve, has a huge influence. Our condition of heart, and we've really hammered that out here lately as we've been going through our series of lessons on worship. We've been talking about making sure that our heart is right, making sure that our motives are right, making sure that we do things in sincerity. But the manner in which we serve has a huge influence on people, and we're going to touch on that a little bit tonight. But I want you to notice what is said there in Mark chapter 12. Mark 12, beginning in verse 41. Jesus sat opposite of the treasury and saw how the people put money into the treasury and how some of them were very rich. Verse 42, it said, there was one poor widow who came and she threw in 2 mites, which make a quadrant, which is not very much. We could go into detail about that, but it was very small in contrast to what those rich people were giving. But Jesus said this widow put in more than all those who had given to the treasury. Well, we just discussed just briefly that 2 mites was very small, so how did she put in more? It's because a cup of cold water matters, that's why. That's our thought process tonight. Many of us would have thought, if we'd have been in her shoes, well, all I got is 2 mites, so what difference does that make? It makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference if our heart's in the right place, we're doing it in the right way, and we do it in sincerity. I would dare say, I think you would agree, I would even go as far to say that the Lord can do more with 2 mites given in sincerity and in love than all the riches of the world if it just pains somebody to just let it go. The attitude in which we serve and how we go about offering that cup of cold water has a huge influence on those that we're serving. We need to remember that in our lives as we think about our influence and what we can do and how we go about doing that. As I said just a moment ago, a lot of times we often think, well, you know, what I'm going to do is, in contrast to what some of the other people do, it's just not really that big. I mean, I'm not that talented. I can't do this. I can't do that. And a lot of times we think, well, if I can't go big, I'll just go home. Well, that is the complete wrong mentality we need to have on certain things. And the result is that we do nothing. And if we do nothing, then essentially we've given the Lord nothing to work with. Consider this quote. I wish I could say that I wrote this, but I didn't. I stole this from another different article. But notice what it says here. Little drops of water, little grains of sand make the mighty ocean and the pleasant land. You ever thought about that? Think about how vast the ocean is. What makes up the ocean? Little drops of water. What makes up the land? Every grain of sand. Every little grain of dust or every particle makes the ground that holds this whole church building up. It's impressive, isn't it? You think, well, that's a big spot of land. It is a big spot of land. It is a vast, wide ocean. But it's the small pieces that make it what it is. So it goes on to say, so the little minutes, humble though they may be, make the mighty ages of eternity. I can go back to certain moments in my life where certain influential people, just in a few words and a few seconds, said the right thing to me at the right time. And it made a difference in my life. Can you say that? I'm sure we could go around the room tonight and think about those moments that have stuck with you the entirety of your life. You may have lived 60, 70, some of you 80 years. But those little moments make a difference, don't they? So, what's the lessons to us that we can take from this as we think about why Jesus made such a big deal about such a small thing? First thing that comes to mind is that our work isn't in vain. We've been talking about this some in our auditorium class. Guy had a very good comment about that on that other night in class, but let's expound upon that a little bit more as we think about our lesson tonight. Our work is not in vain. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58, this is usually where we turn. This is usually the passage that we think of when we think about our work's not in vain. But the reason I point this out is that, again, a lot of times we think, well, I don't have that big of an influence. It's not that big of a deal. But it really is. Because as it says in 1 Corinthians 15, 58, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing, in other words, not doubting, not second-guessing, but knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Now, there can be some things that are in vain if they're not done in the Lord. But if we do it in the Lord, if we're seeking to make God's will, and we're doing it out of sincerity of heart, it's going to matter for something. And when it's given to the Lord in the right way, it's not wasted, it is noticed, and it'll be shared, and there'll be good things that'll come from it. We need to understand this as we look at our opportunities that come our way. Don't underestimate those things and don't think, well, it's not that big of a deal. It really is. Because the small things go so far. I love Ecclesiastes 11 and in verse 1. There have been many times in my life that I've kind of hit the brakes and thought, am I spinning my wheels? Do I really have that much of an influence? Am I really doing any good? A lot of times we'll ask ourselves that in life, whether it's at home, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in church. Sometimes you may, if you coach a ball team, you may finish that practice and you think, I just spent an hour or two sweating and we didn't get anywhere. Sometimes in life you're that way. You think, what did we get out of this? And how did anybody benefit from that? Ecclesiastes 11 and verse 1 says, you cast your bread on the waters, for you will find it after many days. I've always added to that thought, if you don't cast the bread out there, it's not going to float anywhere. And it's definitely not going to come back. We've got to do something to the best of our ability. Even if it's just a crumb, it'll come back to us. God will work that out, and good things will come from it. One of the greatest examples that we see that work is not in vain, but in addition to that, just the humble nature of how we need to approach our opportunities in this life is found in John 13. Supper having ended, Jesus laid aside his garments and he took a towel. He took a towel and he girded himself and he poured water into a basin and he began to wash the disciples' feet, to wipe them with a towel as he was girded. If you didn't know their customs, if you didn't know the background of that story, you would just think, okay, Jesus washed their feet. It's a lot more to it than that. During that day and age, not just anybody washed feet, okay? Usually, when somebody was girded with a towel in that way, that was kind of descriptive of, or kind of threw up the highlight mark of, hey, that's a slave. That's a servant. That's a lower person. And if you're having your feet washed, then you're a little bit uppity, okay? The Son of God himself, who was king, who ultimately would show that he was king very soon, he took the most humble position that anyone could ever take. A slave, a servant. He said, I'm going to wash your feet. Why? Because you're dirty? Because they stink? Probably. But because I'm going to show you the importance of what it means to do a small little thing in the service to other people. And Jesus said, I expect you to do the same thing. I'm giving you an example that you do as I have done. I'm not going to ask anybody how many feet you've washed in your life, but spiritually speaking, how many feet have you washed in your life? How many times have we as God's people girded ourselves with that towel and said, I'm here, please let me do what I can. It may not be much. It may not be very important. It may not be very seen. But I'm going to do it because I know it's not in vain. A cup of cold water goes a long way. Secondly, we need to never in our lives, never underestimate even one seed. One seed. Let's turn over to Luke chapter 8, just briefly. Let's turn over there and read that, if you will. I don't have it up here, and I did that on purpose, so let's turn and let's read over there. Luke chapter 8, beginning in verse 4. Luke chapter 8, beginning in verse 4. Notice what it says about the parable of the sower here. There's so many lessons that can be drawn from this, but we're going to look at just this perspective tonight. Luke chapter 8, beginning in verse 4. It says, a great multitude gathered, and when they had come to him from every city, he spoke a parable. A sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell by the wayside. It was trampled down. People would look at that and think, what a waste. Then it goes on to say, it was trampled down, the birds of the air devoured it. Some fell on the rocks. As soon as it sprang up, it withered away, caused lack of moisture. Some fell among the thorns, and they sprang up with it, and they choked it out. So many times in life we look at our efforts and we think, man, that was a waste. But the truth of it is, you never know. You never know. What does he say in verse 8? Others fell on good ground, sprang up, yielded a crop 100-fold. And he said to these, he who has an ear, let him hear. So what's he supposed to hear there? Well, I believe at least in part what his point is that obviously not all seeds will produce. But do you want me to tell you what seeds will not produce? The seeds that are not sown. You can be guaranteed, you can rest assured, if you want to find assurance in that, and I'm not sure that there's any in it, but it is a guarantee that if you don't sow the seed, it's not going to produce anything. And you may say, well, look at all those seeds that were sown, and what a waste, and so on and so on. Well, again, that's not up to us. We've got to sow the seed, we've got to water, and the increase is up to God. But just the point I'm trying to make is that you don't know and I don't know. But I do know that if we don't sow the seed, nothing good will come from it. Seed must be sown. And the seeds that do produce, think about this. We go back to the mustard seed. Those seeds that do produce, and God is giving the increase, all I know to say to that is, wow. It is amazing what God can do when we just do what we can. It is amazing. In our supplement books, number 38, take note of that just a moment there. Let's look at just a couple of, just one verse and then part of the chorus in this song. I love this song. Not a song leader, so I can't lead it, but we're going to talk about it tonight at least. Number 38 in your supplements, the apples in a seed. Listen to the beautiful words of this song and how true they are in comparison to what we're talking about tonight. It said, in the fruitful tree there is an apple. Okay, so the tree's got an apple. Deep within the apple there are many seeds. Of course. So what's the point? Well, the Father set all things in order, knowing just what everything would need. You may count the seeds within an apple. Some of us may have to take off our shoes to do that, but we can count the seeds in an apple, right? Okay? You may count the apples on a tree. You may count the trees within the orchard. Who can count the apples in one seed? You can't. You can't see into the future that far. And neither can I. Who can count the apples in a seed? Who can say how much the fruit will grow? Who can say how far the word will go? Who can know the harvest of tomorrow? Who can count the apples in a seed? I'll tell you, there's been times in my life, times that I've seen in other people's lives, where efforts that were given, and then the results that came from it, and they were completely blown away by it. I've been surprised by things that I thought, it's just not much going to come from that, and then something really good does, and I'm like, what happened there? God happened there. That's what happened. A story was told to me one time. An older gentleman told me that when he was a young boy, he had a couple of friends, and I mean, they were good friends, but the other boy, one of them in particular, didn't grow up in the church. He always encouraged him to go to church. He would go with him some. Always tried to teach him the scriptures, teach him the importance of becoming a Christian. And for years, as they were growing up, he never did. Never became a Christian. They graduated high school, kind of parted their ways. 20 years later, he received a call one day, didn't know who it was, picked it up, it was his friend from high school. And he said, I remember some of those conversations we had. And he said, there's been some things that have taken place in my life, and I was trying to find some solid ground and trying to find my way and trying to work through all that, and I could not forget some of the conversations we had about God. Some of the conversations we had about God's Word and the importance of being a Christian and all the promises that brings with it. And he says, I want to be baptized. And guess who baptized him? That friend from 20 years before. Now, for 20 years, that friend may have thought, well, you know, I did my best, but he's gone astray, didn't do any good. 20 years later, it might have been just a small part of his brain, but in his brain was the conversations they'd had about God. There was a seed there. And it might have been a slow-growing seed, but when it took root, it brought him back to where he needed to be. You never know what may come from one seed, but the seed has to be sown. Just a cup of cold water goes a long way. And then thirdly and finally, we don't need to let our lights burn out. If there's anything that can be discouraging about being a servant of God, and that is, sometimes we give all this effort and we don't see a lot of result. And a lot of times we say, okay, well, there's this much effort and there's this much result. So obviously, again, I'm not having that much influence. I'm so overwhelmed by the opposition. And after a while, those old lights kind of start going out. If we learn anything from the story of Christ, if we learn anything from the New Testament, and that is, we shouldn't let our lights burn out. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 14 through 16, you are the light of the world, a city that is set on a hill that cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. You would tell you how sometimes we interpret that in our brains? We see, okay, just like we sung tonight with the kids, I need to let my light shine, right? Sure. But then we start thinking about all the darkness that we're surrounded by. And especially in today's world, we think there's so much darkness. There is so much darkness that my little light's not going to make that much difference. You know, the truth is that we're completely wrong in that thought process. Because the more darkness that you have, the more darkness that engulfs around us, the more important that one little light really is. Think about it. We think there's so much darkness and there's so many evil people and so many people in society are just going the other way. What difference is my little light going to make in all that darkness? It's going to make a huge difference. I know a lot of your lights went out this week. Now, I'm sorry about that. We did the best we could, but hey, that's life. Sometimes your lights go out. But one little heater or one little light in a cold, dark house goes a long way, doesn't it? And it's the same way in our lives as Christians. Don't let your light burn out. There may be a lot of darkness, but your light matters. It might be just a small light in contrast to that darkness all around, but it matters. Galatians 6, 9 and 10. What did Paul say to the church of Galatia? Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we'll reap if we don't lose heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity, and I believe those opportunities come quite often, let us do good to all, especially those who are the household of faith. Do not grow weary in doing good. Don't let your light burn out, because those lights matter. And when you look at our society today, we don't need lights burning out. We need lights being lit. In fact, we need to be lighting the torches of others around us to make sure that we keep it going. So what does God expect? What can we say from the lesson that we've considered tonight? I think it can all be summed up from Mark chapter 14 and verse 8. Beautiful story here, how a lady that didn't have a lot, couldn't do a lot, but she brought some pretty costly oil and she anointed Jesus with it. She was ridiculed for it. She was told that was a waste. Why'd you do that? Why'd you bother? Sometimes in life we'll face that kind of opposition. What'd Jesus say? So you leave her alone. Quit giving her a hard time. You're missing the fact of what she's done. She has done what she could. I believe that's all God expects us to do. God is a righteous judge. He's a fair judge, a just God. He doesn't expect us to do something we can't. But I do believe He expects us to do what we can. She did what she could do. She didn't wait around on somebody else to do it for her. She did what she could, and she did it right then. And I firmly believe that's what God expects us to do. A cup of cold water goes a long way. I want to ask you a simple question tonight, and that is this. Do you major in the minors? Do you major in the little things? Or are you only focused on the big things, and then when you see that you can't do them, you just do nothing at all? Again, if the seed is never sown, no fruit is produced. A cup of cold water matters. It might be something simple. It might cost very little. But when the Lord is in it, it's a big deal. Matthew 25 and verse 40, and I'll leave you with this. The king will answer to say to them, Surely I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. And he lists several different things there that can be done. But I believe in our thought process tonight, we have to include the thought of just a cup of cold water. It matters. It matters. Remember that moving forward. As we end this year and, Lord willing, go into a new year, let's consider the opportunities that we have. Let's consider what's before us. Let's consider what God has placed in front of us. And let's do our very best at that. And don't underestimate it and think, it's really not that big of a deal. The next time you feel that way, the next time that you think that way, think about Jesus. And think about what He said about just a cup of cold water. If you offer that in my name and you do that in sincerity of heart and you do that in the right way, you'll by no means lose your reward. What a beautiful thought. We all can serve God. Sometimes we sing the song, there is room in the kingdom. That's why. Because cups of cold water matter. Let's all do better in the future. Let's all strive to serve God in a better way. And if there's something that we can help you with tonight, to pray for you and with you about, to strengthen you and to help you to be stronger moving forward, we'd be happy to do that. Tonight, if you're not a Christian and you've never named the name of Christ, repented of your sins, and been baptized, then what a better time to do it than today. To really start your life serving God and offering those cups of cold water. The Lord will be glad you did. And so will you. And the people around you in your life will benefit as well. That's what we do. We just serve God in whatever way we can and do what we can. And God takes care of the rest. If we need to help you in any way tonight, won't you come while we stand and while we sing.